Okay, so now let's talk about children. That sounded wrong. Okay. So, determination of legitimacy of a child. It is governed by the common personal law of the parents, either domiciliary or nationality. In most countries, the personal law of the father is applied to determine the legitimate relationships, such as in our country. Legitimacy is governed by the parents' national law, and legitimacy is governed by the national law of the father if parents have different nationalities. However, if the child is illegitimate, then the personal law of the mother applies, unless the child is recognized by the father, in which case the personal law of the father applies. So the concepts of national theory or principle, domiciliary theory, and personal laws, mga ganyang concepts we already discussed in the previous video when we talked about the general provisions of the new civil code. Okay, so what is the doctrine of immutability of status? The status of the legitimate or illegitimate child is not affected by a subsequent change of nationality of the parents. If the child is later legitimated, the personal law of the child follows that of the father. However, the rights and duties of parent and child would be governed by the new national law of the parents and thus may be mutable. Okay, so when is proof of filiation necessary? Where the child is born after 300 days after the termination of the marriage of his or her parents. The child has no status at this point, and whoever alleges legitimacy must prove it. If the legitimacy of a child conceived or born out of wedlock, or meaning illegitimate, is impugned and the plaintiff has presented evidence to prove grounds for it, the proof of filiation may be used as defense. So, bakit 300 days? Kasi, okay, compute natin. 930 times 9. Okay, so, yung gestation period ng tao is 9 months, diba? Usually. 7 to 9 months. Hindi naman pwedeng ipanganak yung hindi naman pwedeng manganak 3 months pregnant pa lang, diba? So, usually, it's 7 to 9 months. So, parang yun yung basis. Okay, more on that later. So, grounds to impugn legitimacy. The legitimacy of a child may be impugned only on the following grounds. So, it's an exclusive list. First is that it was physically impossible for the husband to have sex with his wife within the first 120 days of the 300 days which immediately preceded the birth of the child due to physical incapacity, separation of bed and board with impossibility of sexual intercourse, or serious illness of the husband which absolutely prevented sexual intercourse. So, yung 120 days divided by 3, parang mga 4 months. Okay, tama ba? Yes, so mga 4 months. So, yung 120 days of the 300 days na to is, paano siya magiging tatay? Eh, hindi nga sila nag-sexual intercourse at that time. So, kapag yan nanganak, parang ika-count back mo, kumbaga. Like, for example, nag-sexual intercourse yung man and woman September. Tapos biglang nanganak ng December. Hindi pwedeng yung ka-sexual intercourse niya nung September, kung yun lang yung time na nag-sexual intercourse sila. Hindi pwedeng anak na yun kasi 4 months. So meaning, may nag-sexual intercourse yung babae sa someone else. Okay? Na either 7 months counting back from December or 9 months counting back from December. So, dapat pag December pinanganak, ibig sabihin it happened sometime. So, magka-count back tayo December. So, November, October, September, August, July, June, May. Okay, May. Tapos, pwede ring April, pwede ding March. So, sometime March or May, kung sino yung naka-sexual intercourse ng babae at that time, yun yung father. Hindi later, 'di ba? Bakit yung husband lang yung sinasabi dito? It's because there's no question sa legitimacy, or rather there's no question sa filiation ng bata sa nanay, kasi saan ba galing yung, sino ba umiire, 'di ba? Pag inire mo yan, kung babae ka, sa'yo yan. Kasi galing sa'yo eh. Walang question dyan. Yung question is kung sino yung tatay. Kasi hindi mo malalaman yan. Kasi hindi naman yung lalaki yung umiire, 'di ba? Sorry sa terms ko, pero basically ganun lang 'yon. So, kailangang pwedeng i-impugn yung legitimacy, pwede mong i-question lang yung legitimacy kung parang kaduda-duda yung circumstances, na parang hindi siya fit sa timeline kung kailan pinanganak yung bata, 'di ba? Kasi within 7 to 9 months lang naman dapat yan eh. So you have to count back. So during that time, did the man and woman have sex? If there was, according to this first round, there was physical impossibility na nag-sexual intercourse sila at that time, because hindi probably may physical incapacity on either parties at that time, or hindi naman sila nagsasama, there's separation of bed and board, separated naman sila at that time, so impossible yung sexual intercourse. Kaya pwede namang separate sila pero nagkita pa rin sila to have sex eh. Pero what is contemplated here is a circumstance wherein sex was impossible at that time kasi walang sex na nangyari. Or pwedeng may sakit yung husband at that time which absolutely prevented sex. So masasabi parang the circumstances would be doubtful. The filiation of the father, of the alleged father, would be doubtful kasi the time when the child was born is parang malabo kasi hindi naman pwedeng maging tatay ka if hindi mo ginalaw yung babae, 'di ba? It's impossible. So ayun. Second ground is that it is proved for biological or scientific reasons the child could not have been that of the husband, save for exceptions. Okay? So, ano yung mga biological or scientific reasons na parang impossible na siya yung husband? For example, one telltale sign is if the husband is a pure Filipino, as in pure Filipino, and then the child was born as an African American. Okay? So very distinct. It's impossible. It's biologically impossible if the woman is a pure Filipina and the man is a pure Filipina, but the child ended up not having the characteristic of a pure Filipino. Okay? So there's parang discrepancy. It's doubtful. So, impossible naman na again, yung sa babae, there's no question. So, the question is, who's the father? Diba? That's why there are TV shows na parang, you're the father, ganong eme. Kasi, with regard to the woman, there's no question, but with regard to the man, whether or not he is the father, diba? There could be doubts. Next is that in the case of children conceived through artificial insemination, there was no valid written authorization or ratification obtained from the man or the father or the alleged father. Kailangan kasi, or the other parent, kailangan kasi kahit sa mga procedures na to, both parties mag-sign ng consent nila. Hindi pwedeng basta mo na lang nakawin kunwari yung sperm, tapos igamitin mo pala for artificial insemination. Hindi pwedeng ganon. Kailangan may valid written authorization. Okay, who are legitimate children? Legitimate children bear the surnames of his or her parents, receive support from them, and are entitled to claim legitimacy and other legitimate successional rights. So they are the following: those conceived or born during the valid marriage of the parents, those conceived through artificial insemination, provided that there is valid written authorization or ratification. Yung ratification pala, hindi ko na-explain kanina. pwedeng walang authorization, walang valid written authorization, pero niratify. Like, tinanggap na lang, nag-assent, yung nagbigay ng assent. Next is children of a subsequent marriage after declaration of presumptive death, conceived prior to the termination of such marriage. So, napag-usapan na rin natin to na merong valid bigamous marriage if, for example, merong absentee spouse dun sa first marriage, tapos since absentee na, nagkumuha ng declaration of presumptive death, so pwede nang magpakasal ulit kasi pinresume na ngang namatay na yung absentee spouse after a certain period of time. Tapos, nag-remarry yung present na spouse, so valid yung second marriage niya. Lahat ng mga anak niya doon nag-legitimate kasi they're born during the marriage of the subsequent marriage. Kaso bumalik yung absentee spouse from the first marriage. So what happens? Mataterminate yung second. However, lahat ng mga naging anak nila dun sa second marriage, legitimate pa din. Okay, next is those conceived or born before the issuance of the judicial declaration of nullity. So, in case na void or voidable yung marriage, lahat ng mga anak at the time when the marriage was valid or subsisting. Okay? Pag void ab initio naman kasi, never siyang naging valid. Pero, kahit na never siya naging valid, technically, hanggat hindi na o-obtain yung judicial declaration of nullity, merong presumption of the regularity of the marriage and the validity of the marriage. Therefore, the children born during that time before the issuance of the judicial declaration of nullity for all intents and purposes of the law are considered legitimate. Next is those who are conceived or born of the subsequent marriage under Article 53 of the Family Code. Next is legitimated children. So, ano yan, kunwari, born yung bata before nagpakasal yung parents niya. Hindi kasal. Pero later yung parents niya nagpakasal. So, hindi sila born during the valid marriage. Pero, nagpakasal yung parents niya. So, may effect siya of legitimating their common children or common child. So, yun yung legitimated children. Adopted children. Adopted children are treated like legitimate children even if walang blood relations between the child and the adopter. Okay, legitimation. It is a process whereby children who in fact were not born in lawful wedlock, such as yung sinabi ko nga kanina, yung legitimated children, and should be ordinarily considered as illegitimate children, are by fiction of law and upon compliance with certain legal requirements regarded by law as quote-unquote legitimate, it being supposed that they were born after their parents had already been validly married. So, para siyang may retroactive effect. The requisites of legitimation are those prescribed by the national law of the parents. If the parents have different national laws, again, the national law of the father is determinative. Once legitimacy is created under the law of the parent, either by birth of the child or legitimation, it is already a permanent status. But the nature and extent of the rights and duties flowing as incidents from the status of legitimacy may be modified by the change of the personal law deemed to be decisive of the child's status. In short, the child's legitimacy is immutable, but the incidents of his status are mutable. Okay, let's go naman to adoption. Adoption is a juridical act, a proceeding in rem, okay, sa whole world, which creates between two persons a relationship similar to that which results from legitimate paternity and filiation. It is the creation of a parent-child relationship by judicial order between two parties who usually are unrelated. The determinative law as to whether the relationship of adoption has been created or not is as follows. First is a child's personal law to protect his well-being. Second, if the child does not reside in the country of his citizenship, the personal law of the adopter will govern, or the personal law of the adopter and that of the child will be applied concurrently. So the legal effect of the adoption is determined by the same law that created the relationship of adoption. Except, of course, for public policy or the interests of its inhabitants forbid its enforcement and demand the substitution of the lex fori. So, adoption produces the following legal effects. Yung successional rights of the adopted child. However, yung successional rights of the adopted child will only pertain to the adopter. Hindi siya mag-e-extend doon sa ibang ascendants. Kasi, yung reason dyan, which will further be explained in succession, is yung adopter, yun yung voluntarily nag-seek na i-adopt yung isang bata. Pwedeng required yung consent ng spouse niya if kasado siya, pero hindi kailangan na married couple yung mag-adopt eh. Pero yung parents ng adopter, hindi naman sila nag-consent to it sa adoption. So, pwedeng ayaw nila. O, diba? Yung relationship kasi between the adopter and the adopted child lang. Legitimate siya, pero hanggang dyan lang. Hindi siya nag-extend sa ascendants. Okay. Parental authority of the adopter over the adopted child and entitlement of the adopted child to all the rights and obligations provided by law to the legitimate children, except, again, like save for some exceptions, like yung legitimate children can inherit parent ascendants, pero si adopted child hanggang sa adopting parent lang. Okay. Consent of spouse necessary for adoption. So, RA 8552 still requires that the husband and wife must jointly adopt, pero hindi kailangan laging couples yung mag-adopt. Pero pag may asawa ka, kailangan ng consent ng spouse mo kasi isasama mo siya sa family niyo eh. So, where the spouses are legally separated, the husband or the wife can adopt alone and the consent of the other spouse is no longer necessary. Kasi hindi naman kayo magkasama bed and board. So, can aliens adopt? Definitely. Pero meron silang requirements. They must be of legal age, in possession of full civil capacity and legal rights, of good moral character, not convicted of any crime involving moral turpitude, emotionally and psychologically capable of caring for children, at least 16 years older than the adoptee. However, merong waiver dito sa 16-year age difference or age gap between the adopter and the adoptee, and that is if the adopter is a biological parent of the adoptee or the adopter is a spouse of the adoptee's parent. So why do they want to adopt their own natural children? It's because legitimate child lang siya if born within a valid marriage. Paano pag hindi naman married si adopter? Or ayaw mag-consent ng other spouse. Hindi nila common child yan. So, para maging legitimate yung illegitimate child mo, pwede mo siyang i-adopt. Okay? Isa yun sa way of circumventing it. Para ma-increase mo, kumbaga, ma-improve mo yung status ng bata. Okay? Kung gusto mong i-improve yung status niya, bakit na-i-improve yung status niya? Legitimate children get more than illegitimate children when it comes to succession, for example. Okay? Kasi yung illegitimate child gets half of what the legitimate child gets as a general rule. So, kapag inadopt mo siya, the effect is magiging legitimate child siya. Okay. Next is that the adopter must be in a position to support and care for his children. His country has diplomatic relations with the Philippines. He must be a resident of the Philippines for at least 3 continuous years prior to the filing of the application for adoption, and he maintains such residence until the adoption decree is entered. Pero merong waiver din sa requirements on the residency and the qualification to adopt. That is if the foreigner is a former Filipino citizen who seeks to adopt a relative from relatives within the 4th civil degree of consanguinity or affinity, or if he is one who seeks to adopt his legitimate son or daughter, or if he is one who seeks to adopt the legitimate son or daughter or legitimate child of his or her Filipino spouse. So, foreigner siya, meron siyang asawang Pinay, kunwari, or Pinoy, tapos merong illegitimate child yon, gusto niya ring i-adopt, diba? And i-treat as his or her own. One who is married to a Filipino citizen and seeks to adopt jointly with his or her spouse, okay na lang joint, a relative within the fourth civil degree of consanguinity or affinity of the Filipino spouse. And next requirement is that merong na-issue sa kanya na certificate of legal capacity to adopt in his country by his diplomatic or consular office. So, dapat yung requirements niya doon sa national law niya ng pwedeng mag-adopt, dapat ipakita niya rin dito na sa country niya, kung mag-a-adapt siya doon, pwede siyang mag-adapt. So, dito, kailangan niya ipakita para i-allow din siyang mag-adapt dito. So, aside sa kailangan niyang i-meet yung requirements ng requirements bago makapag-adapt dito sa Pilipinas, kailangan niya rin i-meet or comply yung requirements sa bansa niya, kung ano yung required doon. Okay. And lastly, his government allows the adoptee to enter his country as his adopted son or daughter. So, kung babalik man siya sa kung saang country siya, 'di ba, na citizen, pwede niyang dalhin yung in-adopt niya. Kasi kapag bawal, hindi aalaw ng Philippines na i-adapt yan. Kasi baka iwan niya lang dito at walang mag-aalaga. The inter-country adoption is a social-legal process of adopting a Filipino child by a foreigner or Filipino citizen permanently residing abroad where the petition is filed. The supervised child custody is undertaken and the decree of adoption is issued outside the Philippines. This is an alternative means of childcare if the child cannot be cared for in any suitable manner in the Philippines. So parang wala nang nag-adapt sa kanya sa Pilipinas, pwedeng bigyan yung child ng opportunity to have a better life na i-adopt ng someone else outside of the country. Pero yung priority is, yung adoption dapat domestic. Yun yung priority. Pero pag parang wala nang chance ng domestic adoption, then pwede nang i-consider yung inter-country adoption. Adoption is not one of the ways prescribed by law for the acquisition of Filipino citizenship. So for example, if an alien or a foreigner wants to become a Filipino citizen, he has to go through naturalization, hindi adoption. Hindi porket nag-adopt siya, magiging Filipino citizen siya kung nag-adopt siya ng bata dito sa Pilipinas. Adoption does not confer on the adopted child the citizenship of the adopter as well. So, kung foreigner yung nag-adopt, kapag Filipino citizen siya, kasi pinanganak siya dito, born of Filipino parents, yung biological parents niya, Filipino pa rin siya, unless, of course, gawin siyang citizen ng ibang bansa after the adoption. Pero, adoption in itself does not convert or does not confer citizenship ng adopter sa adopted child. And lastly, let's talk about illegitimate children. Illegitimate children are conceived and born outside of a valid marriage. They bear the surname of the mother or the father if filiation has been expressly recognized. Generally sa mother. Pero kapag recognized naman ni father through record of birth, public document, or private handwritten instrument, then pwedeng father. They're entitled to receive support from their parents, establishing their legitimate filiation and successional rights. So, napag-usapan na natin last time yung tungkol sa surname. Balikan lang natin. Although, sa previous video, na-discuss na yan. Para lang di na kayo mahirapan. Okay, so surnames. Balikan natin pero na-discuss na to. Legitimate and legitimated children shall principally use the surname of the father. Adopted children shall principally use the surname of the adopter. Illegitimate children shall principally use the surname of the mother, but if recognized by the father, illegitimate children may use the surname of their father. The term principally, quote-unquote, is used, which means that the child may be allowed to use his or her mother's surname. The use of the surname of the father is not exclusive, especially there is a fundamental equality of man and woman before the law. Okay. So, balikan nyo na lang para mas detailed. Pero, yon. Okay. Basta yung legitimate child principally use the surname of the father. Legitimated child principally use the surname of the father. Child conceived before the decree annulling avoidable marriage shall use the surname of the father. Illegitimate child shall use the surname of the mother. If filiation is expressly recognized by the father, the record of birth in the civil register or handwritten document by the father, the illegitimate child may, Okay? May ha, hindi shall. Use the surname of the father, and adopted child shall use the surname of the adopter. So, nalulose na ni adopted child yung surname niya sa natural parents niya once the adoption is completed. Alright, so sa next video, let's discuss the family, home, support, and parental authority. And that would be the last topic for family code. And then we will move on to property. Pero I think I'll upload political law review videos muna before continuing civil code. So yun, poly, and babalik tayo sa crim, and then civ, and then iro-rotation na natin. The next video will be short lang yata. Maikli lang to. Papasadaan lang natin. Alright, sige. See you.